So Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy. And it was a pretty heavy lead over TCU quarterback Max Duggan. C.J. Stroud was third, and Stetson Bennett finished fourth.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams is a deserving winner. I think that it just really depends on how you want to view most outstanding. You know, if you want to view most outstanding as just the all-around best player in college football, I mean, I think Caleb Williams can certainly win that argument, and there's others you might want to throw in there. I know there's a lot of Bijan love, you know, if you're just doing like pure player, and there's others you can point out as well. I know there's also, you know, for some voters, they think of most outstanding, they just think of just all around like the embodiment of like college football guts and glory and leaving it all on the field. I think of Max Duggan in the Big 12 title game and like that kind of most outstanding as well. And clearly there were some voters that thought highly of both guys. I think it was pretty clear those were the top two when all was said and done and the votes shook out. But Caleb Williams, comfortable winner, and I think a deserving winner. Had they called Max Duggan's name, I would have, celebrated that as well and congratulated him. But I thought it was going to be Caleb Williams. I wasn't surprised when it was his name, and I do think he was deserving. If you're looking at it from who's the best college football player, like I said, you can name other guys in that argument, but I don't think you can really make too much of an argument against Caleb Williams. So depending on your angle, he was a great choice either way, and he was I think the right choice in this year's award.
The way I would break it down, personally is, look, Lincoln Riley could have gotten all of the players except Caleb Williams that he got at USC, and would they have been better? Yes, absolutely, they would have been better. But Caleb Williams took them right to the cusp of the college football playoff 1 year after a decade plus of being so far out of where they were, that I couldn't even fathom how to get them back outside of that. Because nobody saw anybody leaving Oklahoma ever. That's a new thing for everybody a year ago. So that's to me why Caleb is the X factor, the one that pushes him above. I would have loved to see Max Duggan win it too, but again, he's there in the wrong year that Caleb Williams exists. So
yeah, I mean, I think if not for Caleb Williams, he was the clear next choice. The voting, the way they shook out, I mean, those two guys were the top two guys by a large margin, and I think when you really boiled it down, you could have just left it at those two, quite frankly. You didn't even really need to invite C.J. Stroud or Stetson Bennett, and if you wanted to even trim it to three and invite just C.J. Stroud, I think that would have been fine too. I mean, I know some people remarked that the Stetson Bennett invite was more of a career honor. I actually wondered maybe if it was an SEC thing. Like they needed some sort of representation there, they felt like, from the SEC. I don't know, but he was nowhere close to being significant in this voting. Like nowhere close. He ended up with 349 total points. C.J. Stroud had 539, but you go from Stroud at 3 to Duggan at 2. Duggan had 1,420. I mean, that's a massive jump from third to second. And then Williams had 2,031. And clear and far away the best, vote getter in terms of the first place votes, 544 to Duggan's 188. Nobody else even had triple digits. C.J. Stroud had 37. That was the third most. I mean, there was a massive cliff after Max Duggan, and even a pretty good rift between Williams and Duggan. So this one really wasn't all that close. Caleb Williams, he took care of business on the field. I think you saw in that conference championship game how valuable he was to that USC roster. I mean, basically was everything to them in so many ways. And, other guys were. Max Duggan obviously, had to put TCU on his shoulders on a couple of different occasions. C.J. Stroud had a great year, not trying to be dismissive. And I understand the Stetson Bennett love too, but this was really a one-man race, and at best it was a two-man race. And I think that the best player did win the award in the end, but I would have been open-minded had they had called Duggan because of just your definition, like I said earlier, of most outstanding. It's in the eye of the beholder.
I had a vote, and my first place vote was Max Duggan. When I went into the weekend, the championship weekend, to me, Caleb Williams and Max Duggan were 1A, 1B. And I was going to watch the championship games. There are some who don't wait until the weekend, which I can't fathom that. I really can't. But I picked Max Duggan and his performance, which was courageous, and so was Caleb Williams. Both teams lost. USC got beat up a little bit by Utah. No matter what Caleb Williams was trying to do, Max Duggan did everything in the ounce of energy he had to put them on the doorstep to possibly win the game, and they still made the college football playoff. And to me, I wonder where TCU would have been had Morris not gotten hurt, even though he had won the job. Would they have been here today where they are now? I take Duggan, I took Williams, and number 3 for me was Hendon Hooker, the Tennessee quarterback, who I looked at him not because his stats, even though his stats were fantastic, because Tennessee was one of the great stories this year in college football, and Hendon Hooker had an amazing year. If he plays those last 2 games, he probably has an extra 500 or 600 yards. To me, number 3 was brutal. I didn't say Bijan for 2 reasons. 1, against Alabama, he didn't have much. Number 2, against TCU, he had 12 carries for 29 yards, no catches. Any of those 2 things, in Texas was good, but they weren't elite. He also, what almost swayed my vote for him, but didn't, was the fact he played behind an incredibly youthful offensive line. I mean, all of them basically incoming players that they picked up in the offseason. So, Corum, he didn't play the last 2 games. You say, what about why Hooker, but then not Corum? Great question. But to me, Corum didn't play in the Ohio State game, and Edwards went off in that game, and he also went off against Purdue in the Big Ten championship game. To me, I think there could have been just 2. I really do. C.J. Stroud, the game against Michigan, he was okay. So that was my vote, and I'll put it out there. I always do. I had Max Duggan, Caleb Williams, and then also Hendon Hooker at number 3.
Yeah, I don't know, though, why people hold the Alabama game against Bijan so much. I know he only had 57 yards rushing, but he had 73 through the air. I mean, he had 120 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. And, they lost Quinn Ewers in that game. But if you want to point to a game, then TCU. And then people will say, well, that's the coach. Well, it doesn't matter. Like, if we can start blaming the coach, and now, you could go down that rabbit hole all you want to. But that game was far more egregious than the Alabama showing. But yeah, I mean, there's like I said, a case to be made for him. There's a case to be made for Hendon Hooker. There's a case if you really want to make a case for somebody, you can. They made a case for Stetson Bennett to be there, for God's sakes, right? So you can go in circles with it, but I think they got it right in the end. I think they went with the best player, and I think that showed in the voting when all was said and done.
All right, I'm going to say this, though. Wait a minute, about Stetson Bennett. I've seen a lot of this. He's maybe not even the best player on his team. Jalen Carter probably is. The tight end might be. His stats were a lot better than a lot of people ever thought. He was no longer just a bus driver. I could see why he got votes, because he was a cute little story, and then all of a sudden he became prolific.
Yeah.
And Georgia lost a lot of pieces on that offense. They lost a ton on defense, but they also lost some on offense as well.
Yeah, I do think he had some consideration there. But again, like I said, it was a 2-horse race this year. And for Bijan, about, Craig, to your point about that's the coach's fault. Well, I don't have to look back too far to a Heisman Trophy winner at Texas, where the inverse was true, in that Vince Young was in late in games because he was, in this Heisman race, and Mac wanted to, showcase him a little bit more. There were games, I know it was 42-0, and Vince Young scored 2 more touchdowns in that game because he was getting more of a showcase, because Mac knew that when it came down to it, all the people who maybe hadn't watched him play against Oklahoma State or Kansas were not going to see those things, but they would look at the stats and go, oh, wow. So those things are there. And Mac was fortunate to have a team in 2005 that was good enough to where he could be conscious of that and ride that out. But those things happen as well. I think, the TCU game against, that's what hurt Bijan the most, obviously.
Well,
but
in the chat room, Smokey, this is from Puduk. How do you deconvolve bad games from bad coaching decisions? For example, Bijan's bad game against TCU is more likely Sark's fault, in my opinion, not enough carries. I think that was TCU's fault. They killed the running game. Now, could they have done more? Yes. But the stats are there. 12 carries, 29 yards, no catches. You can blame it on Sark, but I think you could go down that rabbit hole with almost everybody who may have received the Heisman vote.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I just said a couple minutes ago, was if you want to start saying, well, this guy could have done that, if he would have done this, if this coach, I mean, we can do that with every single guy nominated. Like, what if Caleb Williams doesn't get hurt against Utah? Hey, guess what? They probably beat Utah and win the Pac-12 championship, and this isn't even a question. This isn't even a contest. What if Max Duggan scores? Then, maybe he wins we can do that what-if game with everybody.
Based on that difference in votes that you put up there, I don't think it probably would have affected it.
Well, maybe not,
maybe
but, I think that, not for the guys who already voted like morons before the conference championship games, which should be outlawed. That's just stupid. That's just stupid to do it that way. But I do think if Max Duggan scores and TCU wins, and in light of what that would have meant and how that would have been covered, I do think you sway a few voters. Probably not enough to topple Caleb Williams, but if we're doing what ifs, then what if Bijan Robinson had a better showing against TCU? Was that enough to overcome Caleb Williams? I understand the sentiment though, and that was a blight on his resume for sure. Was when you're looking at it as a voter, like what happened against TCU, the best team that they played all year. And it's hard to explain that other than just saying, yeah, chalk it up to the coaches and to TCU's defense. But Caleb Williams was deserving. I think they got it right, like I said. And it's fun that he'll be back next year and he'll actually be trying to win that thing like Archie Griffin for a second time, which no one other than Griffin has ever done in the history of the Heisman. And I'm sure he'll get great odds to do so because I would only expect USC to be a bit better next year and for him to be a bit better next year. But, yeah, great showing by Duggan, respectable second place showing. And for the other guys, glad they were, acknowledged as well.
All right, when we come back.